Hello, everybody. It is 10 a.m. Sunday morning Pacific time. And Norm, I don't know about you. I'm really feeling the earliness of our Sunday morning today.
I'm kind of a little bit of an early riser, I guess, because I have a rabbit that I had to tend to this morning.
Yes, period.
Every Sunday morning, it's like I got to get the food, I got to get the water, I got to change the litter. So I was up. Let's see, it's what time is it now? It's 10.
It's 10.
Yeah, I was up at 6.
Ugh.
Yeah, a lot of stuff to do today. A lot of stuff to do today.
Yikes.
A lot of stuff.
Indeed. Well, I'm a little slow to
Yeah.
warm this morning, so I've got my Diet Mountain Dew. I'm going to be sucking this down while we're broadcasting, and we are going to finish up. We're actually going to do it. We're
Yes.
going to finish talking about becoming Superman today.
Oh, I mean,
today. I can't
today.
talk.
Well, tonight has rolled into today, I guess, for you.
I don't know what's going on, you guys. Don't mind me.
Hey, you're made from star stuff, from what I can see.
Yes, okay, I've got a cool shirt. This is not a Zcast shirt, obviously. However, the place that I work at, boardwalktees.com, BORED, they make this shirt.
I love it.
Here we go. Made from star stuff. And no, that's not the exact quote, but it was so close that I had to get my own copy of it. And if you want one, I'll put a link into the chat so that you too can be made from star stuff, because we are.
We are. I mean, the same. I mean, Char, I don't know if you know this, but the same molecules that are outside your room right now are the same molecules that are inside my room right now.
This is correct.
We're all part of the same galaxy of star stuff.
We are the universe made manifest.
That's right. And I love that quote. I know that it's a little borrowed from Carl Sagan's Cosmos.
A little bit.
Even
so, it's a profound idea that should be made widespread, massively believed.
And I'm wearing something that you can get on our TeePublic page, and the link is in the show notes, and you can see.
Yeah, nice tank.
Well, my camera just went crazy for a second. It couldn't focus in on all of this awesomeness, right? So it's a tank top. You can get tank top variants of your favorite designs, and this one I should have called it "We Are Gray."
It looks more black than gray, though. Is it like a charcoal gray?
It's a charcoal gray.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So black is like I like charcoal gray. More like I could have gotten it into heathery gray, but there are so many options. That's what we got to love about TeePublic. So many options.
Yo,
all the options.
That's right. I want to say hi to the people who have joined us so far. Terry Lynn, Colorado. Hello. Welcome back. And John Bauer Sachs. I cannot say things today. Bauer Socks. I know your name. I'm so sorry, John. Hello. I'm having trouble. I'm going to keep going right here.
Well, here's the thing. So we're going to try and finish up this whole kind of like deep dive into J. Michael Straczynski's Becoming Superman, his road from poverty to Hollywood. And we're going to focus a lot more today on kind of like the later part of his career. Because in part 1, we focused more kind of like on his, I can't even say it like with enough emphasis, his abusive childhood and the nefariousness of his family, I should say.
Yeah, his family life, right, which for him has a lot of connotations.
Right, but what happened to him then, and kind of like what happened to him as he was getting through kind of like his teen years and into his early writing career, all of that, they were all experiences that turned him into this prolific person, writer, inspiration, and the talent that inspires all of us today. So this back half of his career that kind of like crescendos with, I believe, his script for Changeling. That really kind of like, as I wouldn't say that's his peak, because I don't think he's maybe peaked yet. He would probably even agree. He's like, I haven't peaked yet. I'm just kind of like going along.
I feel that way too.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things that happened like after he was attacked in San Diego, and he started kind of like moving more towards his television career. And his television career, I don't know about you, Shar, and I don't know about the rest of the audience out there, but I knew about Joe Michael Straczynski, and I probably saw his name in many of the credits of the TV shows that I watched when I was a kid. But in the book, he said that there was kind of like this audience, this sweet spot audience that he was writing for, that eventually transcended into and followed him into becoming his Babylon 5 audience. And I'm a pretty average example of that audience. And
Well,
that,
because you
you know,
watched a lot of the animation work that he did in the 80s, correct?
pretty much almost all of it. Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
I was on a steady diet of JMS and I didn't even know it, because when you're, let's see, when he started off, we're going to start off with He-Man. And forgive us folks if we're kind of like really kind of jumping forward here, but we're going to try and wrap up, our review of this in this last segment, this last part
Yeah.
of
Oh,
the
I mean,
three-part,
honestly, we could dissect the book line by line, but we would be here forever.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And we don't, and to be fair to Joe, and to be fair to HarperCollins Publishing, we don't want to dissect it to the most min-maxed degree. We want you to go out there and
No.
experience it.
Yeah. But
But
we're
before,
covering the big stuff, and then you need to read the book yourself or listen to the audio version, which I'm still
yeah,
working through, by the way. I'm at the point where he has just moved to Los Angeles,
okay.
and the whole thing with the LA Times went down. So I'm a little
Oh,
bit behind for what we need to discuss today, but I'm really enjoying Peter Jurasik's narration, and that's kind of my treat as I'm driving to and from work as I'm listening to the audiobook, because my old school car still has a CD player.
yes. Right.
It's the most basic 2004 Honda Civic you could possibly have, and yet I cannot quit this car because nothing's wrong with it. It
With
just
me,
goes and goes and goes. It handles all of my abuse.
that was such a solid year for Honda.
I mean,
I
it's
think.
a pretty decent car. I do think it's showing its age a little bit in reduced gas mileage. But as far as like nickel and diming me to death with constant repairs and whatnot, no.
So
No, it won't.
what do you think of listening to Peter? Do you hear Londo at all, or do you hear him being more like what Joe wanted him to be for this narration?
I just hear Peter.
Okay.
Which I don't know if that's an unusual distinction to make or not, but I'm genuinely hearing this as Peter Jurasik narrating Joe's words. It's not like he's not a character.
Mhm.
He's not trying to intonate anything for Joe or with Joe or anything like that. It's just no, he's reading Joe's words, which I think was the idea
Yeah.
because they contemplated doing some voices and then decided, no, we're not doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I actually, I reached out to Joe via Twitter, as a lot of us choose to do, and
Yeah.
I said, "Did you want Peter to, if Andreas was alive, Andreas Katsoulis, who played Jakar, if he were still alive, would you have had both Peter and Andreas share the load, because they were essentially kind of like your angel and your devil on your shoulders?" And he
Yeah.
said that no, it's like I would have chosen at least just one, because I didn't want to have two different flavors doing the book. He felt that it would have just been a little too uh confusing, I guess, for people who are
That would have
listening.
been, I mean, that would have been really too hot to handle. Those
Yeah.
two getting together again and coming together. It might have been a little jarring having two different people narrating, but if they might have found a way to make that work, it really would have been interesting to hear that result.
Yeah.
Like who takes on what?
Yeah. Or I just hear everything in Andreas's voice anyway. So
Well, anything profound, certainly. I mean,
yeah.
what better of a narrator, right?
Yeah. And maybe like in the opening or the epilogue, because that epilogue is pretty damn good.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah. Well, before we get to that, though, shall we delve into some animation? Now, Norm,
Mhm.
you've said that you've watched a lot of this stuff growing up. This was something that you weren't aware was a JMS product, and yet you consumed a lot of it. I
Mhm.
unfortunately have not. I never really watched He Man, She Ra, Real Ghostbusters. I watched a lot of animation growing up in the 80s as a young kid, but
Mhm.
not those things. So, for people like myself, as well as our audience, can you fill us in as to what we missed?
Okay, so He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, it was created by a company called Filmation, and essentially was an animated tie-in to the Mattel He-Man and the Masters of the Universe toy line. It was
Which was huge.
hugely successful. There's a matter of fact, there's a couple of Netflix documentaries out there. A one called kind of like the toys that we grew up with, and then I believe there's a new documentary that's going to be coming out just focusing on solely He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. And a lot of that culminated into the 1987 movie Masters of the Universe that starred Dolph Lundgren as He-Man. And I believe it was Courtney Cox's first film after she did a couple of small TV shows like Misfits of Science that was on NBC back in the early 80s. And then when she was discovered in Bruce Springsteen's Dancing in the Dark. The music video. He was the girl that he pulled on stage. Hey, baby. And she's like,
and right. And then they go up and they dance. Yeah.
Everyone knows that video, right? So
I think we do. Yep.
So back in the mid 1980s, and I'm going to look here in my IMDb. So He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, at least where Joe is concerned, he wrote for them for 1984 and 1985 season. But most importantly, in this part of his career, this is where he met and started working with a longtime collaborator who would end up working with him on Babylon 5 up until, I believe, season 2 or season 3. That was Larry DiTillio.
Yeah, an important name for Joe at this time in his life.
Yeah, because Larry challenged Joe a lot. I think they both grew and learned and kind of started to understand each other's ways of writing and working and personalities. I mean, up until the point where Joe played this ridiculously awesome game of chicken with Larry, and Larry almost ended up burning down his office.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, I think that speaks a lot to Hollywood in general. It's very cutthroat. It's very on the edge of your seat. You don't really know what's going to happen day to day, and it can be super freaking stressful to the point where you actually want to burn the place down.
And it's a great little story between the two of them, because it just shows that they're building this really rich chemistry as, again, friends and collaborators and writers, and that will continue on throughout the course of both of their careers.
Yeah, yes, certainly. They were building a relationship that becomes very important from this point going forward.
Now, I can't specifically say that I remember something so profound in He-Man and the Masters of the Universe that it changed my life. Not like, say, watching Babylon 5 did, but I'm going to revisit some of his episodes just to see if I can start identifying his writing cadence and his voice. Because writers do that, they tend to repeat things, and sometimes they tend to repeat their favorite tones or cadences or phrases from work to work to work. I mean, when you watch JMS in an interview and then you read his book, he does tend to lean on what he knows. Obviously, that's what a writer does.
Of course.
And he tends to start pulling certain anecdotes that are obviously most meaningful to him. And I want to see if I can find that. Now, knowing what I know of him and all of his work, going back and seeing, oh, did He-Man say this? Or Man-at-Arms, how did he write Skeletor? He is incredibly good at writing female characters all the way back then. So there were characters like Tila and the Sorceress and Evelyn. They were all really good female characters in a predominantly male-dominated cartoon and toy line. Because let's face it, that toy line was marketed essentially for somebody like me. And at that time, 1984, I was 12. I was in the sweet spot of buying or having my parents buy tons of these toys, including Castle Grayskull. The
great, nice.
Yeah.
That was a huge thing. If you were a young boy, you were the target market for all of those things. And now they're collector's items.
Oh yeah, if my mom didn't throw away boxes of mine and my younger brother's toys, well, we probably could have sent our niece and our nephew to whatever college they wanted. Honestly, but who knew? Who knew back then?
Well, who knew, right? Yeah, exactly.
But
so you're gonna go back and you're gonna kind of just see what parts of Joe went into these earlier works and see what you find.
Yeah, if any. I mean, he was writing. I think he wrote a lot of stuff to get into these projects on spec. So basically what happens, what that means for a writer is that you're going to write a bunch of scripts. You're going to basically get paid skata. That is old Centauri for absolutely nothing. But
Joe did a lot of that.
Yeah, and that's the promise of hopefully getting a contract or somebody buying a license for your work, because you still are essentially the owner of your written work. You're the author of that work. even though that you're writing other people's characters. So, but it also gave him a chance to practice a lot too, writing spec script.
Right. Yeah, like really leading right up to this point, he was talking about things like working at the Daily Aztec, and in journalism, you've just got to write on demand. You've got to pound it out, burn through the crap so that you can just sit down and write clean copy from the get-go and get it done. Now, is it always mind-blowing? No. Is it serviceable? Absolutely. That's a turning point for a writer, a big thing. And then you can start actually doing good work.
You get all of the, in golf terminology, you get all of your bad swings out on the driving range, and then you go out there on the course, and hopefully you just left all the good swings, which is never the case for me, ever.
I was pretty hopeless when I tried to golf too. It's just not for me.
So, but I want to jump into some of the comments here, but with John and Terry.
Do it.
We are going to get into Changeling a little bit later on in the show, because that was obviously a very profound work, not just for film, but I think for exposing this story that happened in the late 1920s with the corruption of the LA Police Department.
Yeah, John's got some good stuff there.
Yeah, so John, you're right. Speaking about the movie Changeling and the officer, Captain J.J. Jones, we are going to talk about that a little bit, not in detail, because we want people to watch the movie, and then
or even wiki the story. Just it's crazy.
It's bizarre. It is. Joe's entire writing career is basically writing the most bizarre truth that existed. His own life,
right? Stranger than fiction. You can't make this stuff up.
Yeah, exactly. And how many of these kind of stories are out there that we don't even know about? I mean, thank God, or thank the great maker, or thank Jaquan, that his friend at the San Diego county clerk's office called him and said, "You really got to look at this story."
Right? Oh, right. Yeah.
So let's see. John, Terry says, Norm and I was one of those parents. My son should be listening. He would know this. Well, we're on YouTube, Terry, and all of our shows are on YouTube. So share along.
There we go.
If I could have saved, well, you know what? Just because I want to have more interaction online and on Facebook, I'm going to take a picture of an autographed action figure that I have that was autographed for me by my friend and by my teacher. His name is Anthony DeLongis. And he starred in the 1987 movie as a character called Blade. And they created this character just for the movie to basically improve the sales of a very floundering toy line at the time. It was kind of like the movie. I don't even think Joe was he was asked to do any type of movie treatment or consulted. But anyway, so I'll take a picture of that, and it's my favorite action figure of the toy line. It's amazing, and a little Easter egg for all of our fans out there.
All right, cool.
But kind of like in the waning wake of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, Filmation and the studio powers that be, because they always do this, they want to interfere with the vision that got them there.
Yeah, horrible idea, by the way.
And a very repetitive pattern in Joe's career. Joe enters a project, takes this project to literally award-winning heights and popularity, and then the network comes in and say, like, we're making a ton of money. Let's do something radical and ruin the model that got us here. Thank you very much, Sony Pictures and Spider-Man. I'm just saying. Right?
No.
So so that's essentially what happened with She-Ra and the Princess of Power. That it was just, let's just kind of like, prime the pump and market this thing for all we got and run it into the ground, which is what happened. And Joe says, see ya.
See ya. Yep. Same with Real Ghostbusters. When they wanted to change a lot of the characters, they wanted to make the awesome female character more matronly and softer. Why? You're taking away what's good. One thing that I really got out of this part of the book was just how Joe, he's lost everything so many times. Even though he knows he's got a good thing, his conscience will not let him just say, oh, write it out. Self-interest doesn't really fit into the picture for him, where, oh yeah, I could make this much more money. My life could be much more stable if I just suck it up and keep going with this project and do what I'm told and whatever. Fine. No, he sticks up for what he believes in, is willing to lose it all, walk away from a project, even when people are saying, oh, you're never going to work in Hollywood again. He says, okay. And then
especially
finds a way to make it happen again.
well, especially his agent. His agent kept saying, you know, you can walk off one project and probably salvage your career. That's okay. In
Yeah.
Hollywood, they'll give you that one ask. If you
Yeah.
do it twice, you're going to get a reputation for being someone who is very difficult to work with, and
Yep.
you are in a very, very large pond of very, very talented fish. So
Yeah.
working,
Yeah, they're willing to do anything for
right.
anybody if it means getting their break. Sure.
But that's where we see, I think, the distinction with Joe, because I think this is where this line also comes from John Sheridan and the attitude that John Sheridan has, and a lot of his heroic characters have. You know what? He said to Kosh, he said that, you know what, Kosh? I might as well just risk everything because my own government wants to kill me. I'm in the middle of a war that I can't win. You're not letting me take off the gloves to fight this fight the way I want to fight it. So you know what? I got nothing left to lose. I might as well go up against you too. Why not?
Yep. Got nothing to lose, right?
Right. So, and here's the funny thing, the way it was shot, Sheridan's back was literally up against the wall. Literally.
Yeah. Yeah, that was pretty freaking good.
Right. When Kosh, psychic slapped him and that scar came across his cheek, he was up against the wall and he's like, hey, fine. You can kill me. Doesn't matter. But
right.
I'm going to do what I got to do that's right.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
In that sense, Sheridan is Joe.
Mm-hmm.
He's got to go with what his gut is telling him is the right thing to do at any cost.
And that's why I respect a lot of his decisions when he's in this very kind of like nepotistic environment that is at least Hollywood TV production at the time, which goes all the way back to something he said earlier in the book, or at the earliest stages of the book. He's like, I suffered all of this because eventually it would train me in my career as a writer or prepare me for my career as a writer.
Right. Yeah. Right? Oh, I totally believe it too.
Because with He-Man and then with, I think Jason the Wheeled Warriors was a little bit more of just this side project. I mean, obviously it paid the bills. I didn't get into Jason the Wheeled Warriors as much. I did get into the real Ghostbusters quite a bit. And yeah, you can feel like a tonal shift, especially now when you're a little older and you understand the way the world works. And you can see that from season 1 to season 2, there's a huge gear shift that happened.
Mm.
You're like, okay, yeah, it's just not his vision anymore. So he's like, he and Larry DiTillio were like, see ya. And it's
right.
Don't you find it interesting that his, I guess, his courage was as infectious as it was? Because every single person that he met along the way that he said, no, don't sacrifice your career for me. No, don't jeopardize your future for me. I'll take it on the chin. I'll take it for the team. But they find that self-sacrifice very inspiring and they want to go with him, like Larry.
Yeah, well, I think for one, that's just at this point, he finally found a partner that understood him, understood the power of his work. I mean, Larry, he knew that Joe was an asset. And if Joe was willing to walk away, I think there's a little bit of a strength in that bond, but also just a belief in how good Joe was at this point, realizing that he's doing the right thing. And when one person is willing to do it, it's much more easier. It's easier to say, okay, I'm going to go too. I'm in this with you.
And this is
I'm not leaving you behind.
He's standing on the bridge like Sheridan. Will you stand with me?
Right. Yeah, only Joe doesn't even need a rousing speech. It's just through the sheer essence of like his character, who he is, how he operates, and recognizing, okay, I cannot attach my name to this crap, because that's kind of the way it is, I think, when you're, a writer, where you attach your name to something and you want to be proud of it. Nobody sets out to make a crappy product that's going to be consumed by millions of people. Right. But when you have this kind of interference, this stupid thing where they try to take a really successful idea and then make it better with consultants. Speaking to Terry's comment about how other companies do this, yeah, the corporate environment, I've experienced a lot of this type of thing where if you do anything by committee, suddenly everybody's vision becomes no vision at all. And it's muddled and stupid and just ends up bleh. So you either put up with it as a writer to keep on going so you can pay the bills, or you say, no, I don't want to be associated with this. I simply can't.
Mm-hmm. There's a really funny saying. You may have heard this before, but what's the definition of a camel?
What is the definition of a camel?
A horse designed by committee.
I like it.
Right. Yep. So let's move a little bit forward here into an actual show that I do remember quite well. This was in 1987 to 1988. Now this is starting to get into the sweet spot of a lot of young male geeks, that were of my age, because in 1987 we know that Star Trek: The Next Generation was launched, the second coming of Star Trek. But Joe went his way, and he decided to work on another toy-based television product. And this one was really, really forward-thinking, because it was an interactive TV show that allowed you to buy product that you can use, like an infrared gun or a UV gun that you could shoot at the TV screen and affect the toy itself, like whether or not you're going to score points on the toy, or whether or not the toy is going to blow up. And that is Captain Power.
Boom.
And the Soldiers of the Future. Now, Captain Power, it may seem like a child's live action science fiction show, but it really wasn't. It really wasn't. Now, from the perspective of being a younger geek, you're looking at the biomechanical armor and all the type of Terminator stuff that's going on, and the absorption of soul, all this kind of stuff. That's all really cool. And the lasers and the explosions and the ships and blah, blah, blah. But when you look at it when you're older, you're like, wow, this is some heady stuff. You're talking about you're talking basically what the Borg was before the Borg were the Borg.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So the enemy in Captain Power, they essentially digitized your souls. They absorbed you, digitized it into their realm, much like the artificial intelligence did, Skynet did, and Terminator. I mean, this is a classic science fiction trope that we've seen before. Machines become so intelligent because their AI algorithms have learned everything there is to know about humanity, and realize that humanity is terrible. So we're going to wipe them.
They're not wrong.
So we're going to wipe them out and create this, like what the Borg did. We're going to assimilate. We're going to take everything for what all these organic beings, and then just turn something into our utopia, our mechanical, logical dystopia based on ones and zeros. That's all it needs to be.
Interesting. Now, I've not seen this, and I do find the dichotomy of having something that the kids can kind of grab onto, but then also having that higher meaning where when you revisit it as a, more mature adult, kind of picking from the deeper themes, that's good, clever writing to be able to do that with both audiences.
And this is where I think that, oh, hey, Slice of Sci-Fi, welcome.
Hey.
Norm just got back from picking up my mail. Guess what I have a copy of now? Becoming Superman.
Yes.
Yeah. Get to reading.
That's right.
Glad you're here with us. We are just getting to Captain Power in the show if you want to catch up. So yeah, Captain Power, with this really nice culmination of marketing a toy line, putting out a fantastic science fiction production. And this is where a lot of his team that will eventually be part of Babylon 5 came from. Because this is 1987, 88, and he started cutting pretty much principal photography, production, and all that type of design work in 1991-ish. But also, right after Captain Power, he did a lot of work for the Twilight Zone, the TV series, which obviously was super important to him, as we all know.
Yeah, big deal.
But now we're getting into some interesting non-science fiction work with Jake and the Fat Man for CBS TV, and then eventually Murder, She Wrote with Angela Lansbury.
Yes. Now, did you watch Murder, She Wrote?
I did.
It aired?
I did. I was on a steady diet of, let's see, I didn't watch Jake and the Fat Man that much because I wasn't really a big Joe Penny fan. I loved Murder, She Wrote because my mom liked Angela Lansbury, and she kind of liked the whole like Miss Marple type of like
Yeah. Yeah,
kind
I
of
remember
detective.
7th grade was about the time I was kind of into stuff like that, and so I did watch a little bit of Murder, She Wrote, and I had no idea that there was a Straczynski guy writing some of these episodes. But before that, Jake and the Fat Man, I've not
Mhm.
watched that show. I did know of it, though, because of Jerry Taylor, who was one of the showrunners and brought Joe in.
And this is where that really good relationship started. And Catherine at this time, I believe, was working in the Paramount Studios Next Generation production department.
Yeah, was she interning or something? And then eventually when Jerry went over to co-create Voyager,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean that's obviously where I know Jerry Taylor, but
Right,
that's
right.
kind of where kind of things intersected a little bit.
Right. Circles are starting to kind of like intersect each other, and relationships are starting to be made where you're going to see
Yeah.
a lot of like familiar names, like you said, like Jerry Taylor. And there are some other people that I believe that Ron Thornton, who was visual effects design on Captain Power. I could be mistaken about that because I don't have all of that memorized. But a lot of, like I said, a lot of production people. I think Johnny Accovelli started working on Captain Power with him back then too.
Was he? Okay, cool.
But when I was watching Jake and the Fat Man and Murder She Wrote, a lot of this TV was kind of like the TV back in my day, like with Simon and Simon and Magnum PI and like all of these 80s shows. Now, Magnum PI introduced me to a director that you will see later on a lot of in Babylon 5, and that is the very, very famous, very talented Mike Vehar.
Nice.
Yeah, so I was pretty excited when I saw his name start popping up in Magnum and seeing some of his little design direction influences from then, like shooting through like filters and stuff,
Oh, uh-huh.
into what he did for Babylon 5. So
Nice.
Joe's starting to get all these relationships built, but at the same time though, like Murder She Wrote, Angela Lansbury started wanting more creative control
Yep.
over the subsequent seasons. So Joe's like, well, this isn't where I want it to go. Thanks, but no thanks. It's time for me to really start working on something that I can control, something that I want to do. It's time for me to take this idea of all of these powerful warring races trying to find this neutral, safe place in neutral space where they can come in and work out their grievances with diplomacy and peace. And thank God he gave us Deep Space Nine. I mean, Babylon 5.
Oh, you went there. You went there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, most people who know Babylon 5 are aware of the story where Joe was basically shopping Babylon 5 around with a series Bible, some, other documentation to go with it to prove, basically as proof of concept that yes, this could work. I've got a big plan for this show. And of course, he pitched to Paramount, and then lo and behold, not much longer after that, Deep Space Nine is announced. Conceptually, on paper, these shows start out pretty much the same. It's a station, it's kind of, people with differences coming together to work out their differences, yada, yada. And now, granted, both shows develop their own entire thing. So credit to the folks at Deep Space Nine for making the show its own thing. But to start off, you know, we'll never know the full truth, but Paramount does not look good as far as this hot move goes.
Yeah, the way that he wrote it, he was writing in his book, in Becoming Superman, the way he wrote it, he was just laying out the facts and letting people kind of extrapolate the history, his interpretation of what happened. And obviously if it looks like a cat and smells like a cat, it's usually a duck, right? So
they go quack.
They go quack, nibbled to death by cats.
That's right.
But what happened? Yeah, you're right. He had his proof of concept, and little did he know that would end up just kind of like hanging off to the side in some scriptwriter's room or some producer's room. And then all of a sudden, Paramount wanted to produce their own TV show, the UPN, United Paramount Network.
Right. Yeah. Even before Voyager, this was kind of the plan. This was the idea.
And then all of a sudden, this prime time entertainment network, Warner wanted to split off and do their thing. So it wasn't necessarily something that the Star Trek franchise wanted to do. It was something that they needed to produce. And I'm talking about trying to find something to appropriate for their next Star Trek series. Because Star Trek The Next Generation, I think around that time was really hitting its stride because it was going to get canceled somewhere around season 2, maybe in the middle of season 3. They were just thinking like, this isn't working, but it started to pick up and get a lot of steam. So we're like, well, shoot, if this is getting steam, we might as well get another production in the pipeline. So what do we got? What do we got? What do we got? And someone was like, what about a space station? I got this great idea.
Without actual archival footage in my head, that's more or less what happened. Yeah.
Yeah. They're like, anyone got any ideas? And some guy's like,
something different, right?
Like, but Star Trek is about a trek. It's not about, people coming to a station. Like, but what if it was really cool? I have this great script.
Yeah. What if we're going to delve into lots of social commentary and general humanity issues through all these different warring races? They all come together on this station. Blah, 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 blah. We know the rest.
Yes, that's right. It was a very special Deep Space franchise, to paraphrase one of them.
That is one of my favorite digs of all time. It's so subtle, and yet when you know the reference, it's just like, oh, look at what you did.
So we all kind of know the sordid history between what happened with Joe, his script, pitching it, and then going to PTN, trying to pitch it to them, trying to pitch it to Warner's, him cracking his molar, him eating ice to the point where he couldn't speak.
Oh, good God. I can't imagine.
Yeah. Like all of this is very, very, very well documented. And you should, if you haven't seen any of his documentaries yet about it, you really should, because no one tells that story better than he does.
Yeah. Indeed. Yeah. And it's something that's been hashed out for 25 plus years. Mm-hmm. As to what happened. And Slice of Sci-Fi has a good comment about, there was an article a couple of years ago, less than 5, where someone who had been there on the Paramount side confirmed the swipage. Okay, interesting to know. And JMS commented on it when someone brought it to his attention on Twitter. So I think Joe knows that, there was certainly some borrowing of the ideas that he pitched to them, if nothing else.
Absolutely. And it doesn't, we're all smart people, but it doesn't take like a certain level of genius to know that these things were very similar for a small portion of time. And then they all kind of like, they diverged and went their separate ways.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is like, especially at this time, the circles of sci-fi were fairly small. So to have 2 space station series happening at about the same time, a lot of people had doubts as to whether or not that would work. And Babylon 5, I think, suffered for it.
Well, yeah, we all know that when the PTN pilot came out, long story short, they liked it. They put it into the pipeline. They said, we won't be able to get you into production a year later. Meanwhile, Deep Space Nine, being a weekly series that has huge funding from the Paramount Network, was able to get an entire season underneath their belt before Babylon 5 came back out, when people realized that, oh, look at this. It's a copy of Deep Space Nine. Well, no, it really wasn't. It was just really poorly marketed and scheduled. But it actually aired before Deep Space Nine, technically.
Yeah. Which, if you're paying attention, you know that. But if you're a very average sci-fi fan, you might just think, oh, Babylon 5 is a complete ripoff. That's nothing could be further from the truth. But yeah, the timing, that sucks. Because if Babylon 5 could have gone on the air first, I think that would have erased all pretense of this debate.
Yeah.
But it didn't. So here we still are talking about it all these years later.
And that's really a really good topic for like a full episode of what we do. But I want to because there's a lot there, and you got to prepare, like, especially against kind of like the naysayers, the Deep Space Nine kind of zealots out there. It's a hard argument to kind of broach, but I'd like to do that debate justice. So so after Babylon 5 and Babylon 5 Crusade, and we've talked about the history of Crusade in previous episodes, he's doing well in the TV universe, and he's done a couple of really interesting scripts for like Ninja Assassin. Started doing a little bit more comic book writing, but the one of the biggest projects probably of his career, and it finally came to fruition, was this project, and I cannot stress how good this movie is, and that's Changeling.
Yes. So financially, this has been peak for Joe.
Mm-hmm. He was, again, he was kind of getting out of the TV business. He was looking to do something new, something fresh, something risky. He wasn't really getting a lot of steady work. He was getting some scripts here and there for, like I said, for some of his comic book writing. But
yeah, and this is in the aftermath of Babylon 5 too, and if you're not in the sci-fi circles, you have probably no idea what people in this circle are doing. It's just not something, at least back in this era. People weren't really paying attention, especially to a show like Babylon 5, where they weren't necessarily in Hollywood. They were in the old hot tub studio that was a little bit removed from the inner circles, if you will. And then there was the whole thing with Crusade, which crashed and burned, as we know, and he found out the truth as to the real reasons why a little later on. And so, I mean, I think he took just a little bit of time to recover, but then also he's just like, okay, now what? And is stumbling along until this happens.
And Joe, being Joe, has that great bit of advice where, like, what is it? Is you can do something. If you do the same thing for 10 years, what was it? He wrote this on Twitter. Basically says a 10-year career is basically the same thing over 10 years as opposed to doing unique once. So
right.
It's kind of like, that definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results.
Right.
So he said, I've done TV, I've done animated TV, and they said an animated writer can't get TV work. Well, I proved that wrong. Now I'm become a TV writer, and a TV writer can't do comic book work. Well, I've proved that wrong. So, at least to myself, not necessarily, I don't think he cares so much about, the expectations of studios and bean counters. But now all of a sudden he's like, what do I do now? He's like, well, I want to go back to this project that I was introduced to many years ago. And he said, I'm going to try my hand at screenplay writing for Hollywood movies. And he did this, and at the near expense of his own home and selling his house and going back to bare bones.
Once again, back against the wall.
Yeah, back against the wall. And I think later on, Pat Tallman, Lita, said that, Joe, the one memory that I have of you every single time I walked into the Babylon 5 studios was that you always looked like you were ready for a fight. You always had your hands up, ready to duke it out with whatever came your way. And that's who you are. So he dug deep and he put out his script, and, his agent farmed it out there. And then all of a sudden, Ron Howard options his script. Ron Howard, the Ron Howard of Imagine Studios, Imagine Entertainment, and probably at that time, which was like the early 2000s, was responsible for blockbuster successes. He was an Academy Award-winning director, producer. Obviously, we all know him as Opie and Richie Cunningham from TV. So yeah, he optioned Changeling. Couldn't do it. Told Joe that, I'm going to have a friend of mine look at it and see if he wants to direct it. You mind if Clint takes a look at that? And Joe's like, Clint Eastwood.
That guy.
Yeah, that guy. And like, yeah. So long story short, Clint Eastwood takes a shot at it, and they get Angelina Jolie. And
yeah, just huge scores down the list here.
Yeah. And they produced this incredibly critically acclaimed, brilliant movie that everyone should watch.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the story itself, we referred to John's comments not too long ago. Just to reiterate, Los Angeles Police Department, corrupt as heck. This woman, they tried to give her another child because she was missing her boy, and she realizes it's not her kid. And instead of trying to figure this out, they throw her in a mental ward without a warrant. And then meanwhile, young boys are still getting killed.
Yeah.
Kind of crazy. And this was a time when the LA Police Department was just kind of ruthless. They were accountable to nobody.
Not even themselves, it seems.
No, they kind of did what they wanted. A little bit of a different era, some crazy things. And have you noticed, side note, serial killers are not nearly as prominent today as they used to be. I think things like surveillance and just the constant video accountability of you could be on camera at any time has deterred a lot of people, either from doing it at all or just they get caught that much faster before they can kill tons and tons of people.
Yeah, it's a really, really terrifying notion that back in like that time in the 1920s, where you're just like, what wasn't being reported as opposed to what was stumbled upon being reported, right? Because
right? Yeah.
Christine Collins, her son being reported as a missing person had really no correlation to what was happening in Riverside, California at the time, when one kind of, not a renegade cop, but just somebody who was answering just this anonymous tip. Turns out that this tip and the abduction of this boy ended up being probably tied together, but one of the most nefarious stories like in the history of the LA Police Department. Now, two things I wanted to bring up that were very specific to Joe when I watched this movie. One was at the very beginning of the movie. And this is a spoiler alert for anybody who has not seen this movie. Not necessarily a spoiler alert if you know Joe, just that if you haven't seen this movie. So please don't listen to this right now if you haven't seen the movie. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. At the very beginning of the movie, Angelina Jolie's character, Christine Collins, picks up her boy from school, and he's a little beaten up. And she says, what happened? And principal or the teacher says, got into a fight, got roughed up the other kid. And she says, what did I tell you about fighting? And he said, never start a fight, but always finish it. She's like, that's right.
You gotta love that line, right?
I was like, that's John Sheridan and John Sheridan's dad. That was that line. I was just like, I started laughing, and Carol's like, why are you laughing? She's like, because I know where that line comes from.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those themes. It's one of those things that Joe has inserted into now more than one work. It's a part of his voice. Speaking of Christine Collins, John Bowersox has a good comment about no one knows the date of when she died. She kept trying to get J.J. Jones to pay her, and then she vanished without a trace.
Was that the corrupt captain, J.J. Jones?
I don't know. Yeah. I think so.
Okay, so
I think so.
Yeah,
I think so. He accused her of being a bad mother and bringing ridicule to the police, and then threw her in a mental ward without a warrant. So it's got to be him. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the captain, and he was brilliantly acted by I can't remember the actor's name. He was the lead on a show called Burn Notice that I watched for a while. He was really, really good actor. But the second thing that was very, very particular to this book and to this movie, and this is one of those. Well, I know that this story comes from Joe's book because it's very explicit. When Joe was a boy, he was walking around, and we're talking about a young boy, like 7-ish, 7-ish. He was walking around a new neighborhood that Charles moved them to in New Jersey.
Yeah, and, surprise.
Right. And then all of a sudden he was lost. And then this strange car pulled up, and there was a woman in the car and a man in the car. And the woman reached out and said, your father's been looking for you. He's really worried. You should come with us so we can take you to him.
Yeah.
And Joe's like, no. He goes, first of all, my dad never worries about me, ever.
Right.
So nice tip off there. And second of all, I don't know you. I've never seen your car. I've never seen my dad talk to you or have you come over for dinner or anything like that. So all of the red flag warnings were going off, and Joe just ran, and they chased him. And then Joe lost him in the network of streets that was that area of New Jersey. That exact same scene happened in Changeling.
Oh, did it? Okay.
Yeah. Where the serial killer in Changeling was hunting down these young boys with the same story.
Wow. Okay. And when you're a kid, if you have a normal loving home life, you might think that some random stranger saw your mom or dad in danger and said, okay, find my kid's over here. Logically, if you're not thinking too deep about it, you might think, okay, I better go with these people. They know what's up.
Right.
Joe, by contrast, was smart enough to recognize the red flags, but then, through virtue of his horrible home life, realized, no one's there's going to give a crap about me.
Yeah. So that was when I saw that.
It actually saved him.
Yeah. So he interjected a little bit of his personal life story into this story, because it's not far from an actual truth that a serial killer or a kidnapper would do something like that. That's the bait, and I think it's a very common tactic for abductors to use that type of strategy, especially with children, because children would know better. Because children, except for maybe Joe at that time, were very trusting.
Well, right. That's another thing. Is back in those days, it wasn't unusual to have kids just running around doing whatever, come home before dinner and then that you were fine. And methods of communication weren't what they are today. Nobody had a cell phone on them or anything like that. It was easy to go missing, honestly.
Yeah, and again, we're dealing with like we're saying, the 1920s, and you know what? There was a certain level of what's the right word? A certain level of innocence and a certain level of naivete and trust. In the United States at that time, where it was the post World War I environment where America was very prosperous. We were headed towards the Great Depression, but we weren't quite there yet. So there was just a lot of kind of innocence going on right there. And
agreed.
Young boys at the time, they wouldn't know any, or young girls, or even women, or people that couldn't defend themselves. Older people, they would all be prey to somebody who wanted to do them harm.
Yeah, there's just a much more instilled instinct to trust first.
Yeah, especially back then.
Well, yeah. Why would anybody do something horrible?
Right.
It's not something that occurred to you, at least on first thought.
So Changeling was a huge, huge, huge win for Joe in his career. And essentially, it catapulted him and secured him financially to do what he needed to do. And that's have a safety net to go on to new and more exciting projects, whether it is more movies or going back to TV with a supremely successful project, at least critically, that he helped launch for Netflix called Sense8. Now, I know that we are glossing over a lot of material, but again, you really should be reading the book for this.
Yes, definitely.
But to kind of, as we're winding the show down, I wanted to bring us full circle to, at the very beginning of the book, he is on location for Sense8.
Right.
And at the end of the book, he's kind of closing with Sense8. And then a couple of really, really, really poignant stories.
Yeah.
So,
and if you've not watched Sense8, what are you doing? Go spend your Sunday afternoon binging this show on Netflix. It's a very good show to binge, by the way, because when you first watch it, it's going to be very confusing. Mm-hmm. But you get a few episodes in and you start to figure out what's going on and you realize this is one hell of an intricate, cool story, and it keeps you going and it's going to blow your mind. It's good stuff. And then knowing, if you follow Joe throughout his career and then you read this book and you watch Sense8, you're going to see, again, a lot of the quality of his writing just at the most polished level, right? Because he's honing his craft through all of these decades of personal suffering, of personal tragedy, of professional suffering and professional tragedy, growing and evolving and devolving and being broken down to come back up. And then all of a sudden he creates this masterpiece critically. It wasn't really accepted from the marketability of the show, but critically it was really well accepted. Yeah, it had a very loyal cult following. And ultimately when they canceled the show after 2 seasons, they said, no, you can't stop here. There was a massive fan write-in to at least produce one more work, which ended up being basically a movie to close the story, give it a fitting ending. They made that happen. Yeah. Yep. And then he, I think he went back to doing some comic book work after that, but then he said that his eyesight started to fail him a lot more, and he can't stay on the computer as long as he used to. And obviously, we know that he didn't get the right treatment for his eyes early on. That could have probably helped stave this off on the back end of his career. But now he's in he's like 65 at the writing of the book, and he's made all of these great relationships. And I hope to the great maker that his relationship with Lana Wachowski that he built into Sense8 carries on into The Matrix 4, because they've greenlit that. And I couldn't even imagine Straczynski writing for the Matrix storyline, which would be amazing. It could be something else. I mean, we know that Joe does have some other things in the works that he can't necessarily talk about right now. And he is doing a little bit of publicity for basically a book tour. Yeah. More or less. Some of it's convention, some of it's not. But I think the book in and of itself has done fairly well. certainly people like us who know of a lot of his work, like Babylon 5, this has been very eye opening as a reveal into the person whose work we've admired for decades now. I've learned so much about Joe, and I think I said in the very first episode, my respect has always been high for this guy, but now it's just off the charts.
There are 3 stories in particular in his epilogue that I wanted to focus on. And again, if you have not read the book, please, please, please take this as a huge spoiler alert, because not only are these powerful stories that he closes on, but they are a testament to his character and just cement how much respect that Char and I both have for him as a person, as a humanitarian, and as a friend. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is a spoiler alert. Please take this seriously, because I don't want to ruin the ending of this book for you. But 3 stories in particular just absolutely broke my heart, but and made me want to hug Joe like immediately after I read them. The first story was saying goodbye to Harlan Ellison.
Yeah. Just especially now knowing what an intricate relationship they had. Yeah, that's a huge loss.
There was, I started crying when I was reading this. I was outside on my patio. I was having my pipe, and I was reading this. And when he crawled into bed alongside of Harlan Ellison, I was crying.
Aww.
Yeah, because it's like, this is, remember, the very first moment that the relationship started was when he cold called him and said, "Hey, how can I help sell my writing?" And Harlan was like, "Don't write shit. That's how you sell your writing." That's how this, from that moment to the moment where he basically looked in Harlan's eyes, Harlan kissed him and said goodbye, was heartbreaking. But that relationship, we would all be lucky to have something like that in our lives.
Most definitely.
Right?
Yeah.
The second was saying goodbye to Andreas Katsoulis.
Yeah. Now, here's the thing about the Babylon 5 years is he talks about shopping the series, getting it off the ground. But if you're looking for details about the making of Babylon 5, you're not going to find a whole heck of a lot. Really, like one of the biggest things I got from that era that I did not know was Jeff Conaway was kind of falling off the wagon in the last season, going back to drugs. I thought he was sober for all of Babylon 5, and come to find out he wasn't. That makes me sad.
Yeah.
But anyway, back to Andreas.
And then there also like a little bit of pig-headedness from Jerry too.
Well, I mean, that's to be expected. But yeah.
But it was kind of like, this is way after Joe wrote the final dinner scene with Sheridan being surrounded by his friends. But the way he described saying goodbye to Andreas, like Andreas was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer.
Yeah, he'd been a lifelong smoker.
Oh yeah, just smoking in and out of makeup
constantly,
all the time. And that was Andreas. And even Jerry said that the famous ham story, the free ham story. He said when he said, I got all these groceries and like 3 cartons of cigarettes for Andreas as he was still smoking, and he, it's just, he was a huge smoker, and it caught up to him. But yeah. I mean, he said that's the way that Andreas lived. Andreas lived with no regrets, no apologies. He is who he was. And he said that at the final dinner, he looked Joe. It's hard for me to get.
Take your time. Take your time.
He looked Joe in the eyes and said goodbye without saying goodbye. He said that I've never met a man that faced his own death with such honor and grace and dignity. And he says, if I could face my own death with a fraction of as much, then that would be something. And I'm like, yeah, but the thing is that that's not just even Andreas for me. That was just kind of like, that's Jakar, the way he brought that to Jakar.
Oh yeah.
So that was heartbreaking to hear. But the last one was a true testament really to Joe's character. And it put to bed a lot of rumors and aspersions to what happened to Michael O'Hare, Jeffrey Sinclair,
right.
of Babylon 5.
Yeah, and if you don't know this story, get on YouTube and find Phoenix Comic-Con, where Joe talks about what really happened with Michael O'Hare, where he says this for the first time after Michael O'Hare's death. I mean, Joe kept his promise.
He kept his promise, right? And it was Joe. So basically, Michael O'Hare was suffering from a multiple personality disorder syndrome.
I thought it was schizophrenia.
I don't know the difference. I thought it was the same thing.
I mean, I thought it was more of like a paranoid schizophrenia, because multiple identities I don't think are necessarily a part of schizophrenia, where like in schizophrenia you hear voices where things like the FBI is trying to get me.
Okay. So you know this more than I do, so you're probably
Well,
right.
not necessarily. I mean, I don't know his formal diagnosis or
Yeah.
anything, but I thought it was paranoid schizophrenia.
Okay, so let's say paranoid schizophrenia. So
Either way.
he was suffering from a very severe mental illness.
Yes.
And it was hard for him to work anymore on Babylon 5. And he was like, you know what? I need to leave the show, but I don't want anyone to lose their jobs. This is Michael O'Hare. Like, I don't want anyone to lose their job because of me. He says, Joe, please don't cancel the show. Please don't cancel the show. And Joe's like, okay, look, we'll work it out so we can write your character off the show, and then we'll get you treatment. And he said that, I promise I'll take this story to my grave. Mm-hmm. Joe said this. And Michael O'Hare says, no, I'm not going to put that responsibility on you. It's like, I will take he goes, you will take the story to my grave, meaning that Joe will take the story to Michael O'Hare's grave. Because Michael O'Hare said, after I die, I want you to tell people that even the commander of a space station, of a popular science fiction TV show, can suffer what I suffered as a real person and as an actor. Yeah. And I said, I want that to come to light after I die. And when Michael O'Hare was pronounced and his story made it to the Hollywood Reporter, Variety, all the trade magazines, that's when Joe, that year on that convention circuit and online, shared what happened and kept his promise.
Yeah, that's such grace from both parties with this story. Michael O'Hare kind of crafting the way he wanted this to go, and then Joe actually following through. I mean, if you think about just how cutthroat and vicious Hollywood is, I mean, any other producer, any other showrunner, I think might have just said, no, we have to do what's in the best interest of the show. Money, money, money. We did all this work just to get it going, and now in the first season, we've got all these problems. What the hell? No, not Joe. Not Joe.
I think, and I don't know Joe personally, but from learning about him through this book and learning about him through his writing and his work, I think one of the things that's most important to Joe are the relationships that he makes as a person. Because when it all comes down to it, it's the relationships and the connections that we make as human beings that are irreplaceable. You can replace money, you can replace objects, you can replace things in your collection, but you can't replace a broken relationship. You can't replace tainted honor. You can't replace, a soiled reputation. You can't replace the things that are most meaningful in life, which are the way that you are perceived as a person. You know? And I think that's, if I come away with anything from this book, it's that whatever he is, whatever circumstances turned him into the person that he is, you can't take that away from him. No matter how hard you try, you cannot remove that from the person, and you can't remove that from his work. So there's a huge amount of humility that you experience from this book, something that you just don't see in a writer of his caliber and reputation.
Yeah, I think two big words come to mind. You said the first one just a moment ago, humility. I think that has eventually over time translated to dignity. And that is definitely a word I would use in relation to Joe.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't really have too much to close with, because if I do, I'll have to break out a bottle of Bravari and we'll be here for another hour.
And it's not even noon here in the Pacific time zone. But yeah, it's true. We could go on about this all freaking day long, but like we've said throughout, just read the book for yourself, come to your own conclusions, take from it what you will. There's just so much here. But I think the big important thing is you're going to learn so much about Joe. Why is Joe the way he is? How has he conducted himself like this? Now once you know the reasons why, it's profound that he really has beaten the odds in every way.
And now when Joe says in conventions that if I can do it, anybody can do it. That's not pandering, and that's not a cliche, and that's not,
Mm-mm.
whatever, you want to describe that as being. That's the truth. He fought every obstacle ever. He fought not.
Yeah, pretty much. And he sums that up in the book too, where,
Yeah.
the odds of surviving an abusive parent. Here's your odds, and making it as a Hollywood screenwriter, but then also having an alcoholic family history, surviving a beating in San Diego and being left for dead. All of these things, he checks off every single one, and then comes up with this outrageous number of I am one in, a million to the 40th power or some kind of exaggeration
Yeah.
like that. Only it's not an exaggeration, it's his life.
Yeah. And that's something that here's something that I'd like to recommend for all of our listeners. So I started talking about this book with Carol, and I bought her a copy, and she read it, and she says not only is it one of the best books she's read, she can't believe that it's an actual true story. Because
Again.
because if it wasn't a true story, she says it's still an incredible book. It's incredibly well written. So she passed that on to somebody in her life that she felt needed encouragement. Somebody who felt like certain, certain things have not gone this person's way.
Okay. Uh-huh.
Read this book and find whatever kind of inspiration you can find from this book.
Nice.
And if you have this book and you're in the position of lending it to somebody, let whatever you've learned from this book in the lending of this book pay that book forward, because everyone, I think, will be able to find some type of value, no matter how large or small, from this book, because what he goes through as a human being is remarkable, that he's come out the other side sane up to a point,
I
and
mean,
two, right? And
yeah.
and successful.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is remarkable. And there's no better way to close this show than with that.
So thank you, everybody, for joining us here on the Zocolocast. Thank you for joining us for the last few shows that Shar and I have focused on for JMS is Becoming Superman. It is a profoundly amazing book. Please enjoy it if you have still some of it to enjoy. If not, please pass on what you have enjoyed to other people. And note, we will be taking the next week off.
Yep. Labor
That
Day.
is Labor Day weekend, and I'm sure a lot of us are going to be traveling. So in the meantime, please take a look at all of our backlog library of shows here on the Zocolocast, and then check out some of our earlier work on the Facebook page, where Shar and I were also kind of like, we were learning this process, and not nearly as amazingly polished as we are now, to the point where we're comfortable wearing tank tops and really cool looking quoted t-shirts.
Yes. And also we have much better video resolution now, at least on my end.
And audio too. Yeah.
That too. Yes. So it's very good stuff. Terry, I'm glad you enjoyed the 3-parter. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, everybody. And tune in next time when we do this live, the week after Labor Day, the weekend after Labor Day weekend. And until then, be seeing you.
Bye.